So today I would really like to make more of what I would call the most interactive as possible. So it is not just a long lecture, but I would call it more a conversation. This is very important because based on what we have put together today, ensemble, it's really a capture in time of where we are today, show you how we work with our team, welcome you to our studio and see a little bit of a hint how it's inside, and some of you who are students, how it's to practice and what it means in reality. And therefore, for that reason, I also invited here my colleague, Jessica, who will introduce herself, because it's very important in the world today that we acknowledge collaboration, that we understand, who are our teammates, that we educate. And in this case, Jessica is one of my most talented teammates, and she comes from Italy. I also have an Italian heritage, I would like to call it, due to my paternal side of the family. But with that, I would like to first introduce Jessica, and then I will introduce myself. Jessica, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Daniel. Hi, everybody, or I would say buongiorno to everyone that is here today. I'm Jessica. I've been graduating in Ferrara in Italy. So I had my 5 years master in Italy, and then I moved to the Netherlands. And yeah, I think it's 5 years that I'm working in West8, and it's 5 years that I'm working side by side with Daniel, especially on, let's say, North American projects. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share experiences.
Yes, and in this way we can make this presentation a little bit more dynamic. So it's not just, the cathedral sitting on the chair, give the mass, but it's really an open table for debate. So we try to be very careful with the time. We know we have about 45 minutes. And we should allow some time for questions and answers. And with that, maybe we should begin the journey. I don't know, Carlo or Gaia, if you want to add something before we commence.
No, you can just start. So
perfectly.
Okay.
So with that, just give me a few moments while I load the screen. Please confirm you can see it. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So for today, really, beginning with myself, my name is Daniel Vasini. Yes, I'm the creative director of West8. I basically run the practice in North America, although before going to North America, I was in the Netherlands office for almost 10 years. Not a minor detail, which really enabled me to understand the culture of how we practice. Because much of what we do, it's the culture of practice, and every firm has a practice, have an approach towards landscape. In our case, West8 have a specific approach which has to do with the Netherlands heritage of understanding landscape, right? Very different from the French school, for instance, or the German school, or the Italian school of understanding landscape architecture. I would like to say I've always been working in liaison with the Rotterdam office and the American office, and collaboration is key. We cannot talk about West8 without starting with this publication, which is called Polders, a publication in which our founder, in this case, Alan Helse, which I happen to have the luck to collaborate next to him and to be my mentor in the practice. Before commencing West8, he really had a call from his intuition about understanding the Dutch landscape. And that publication I just put to you, Polders, is really the meaning of gaining, reclaiming land in the Dutch aspect of it. And I would like to say the West8 practice could not exist without understanding first, where do we come from? And that is very important because that has to do with the identity, and it really informs a bit the approach of how we do it. However, I would like to focus a little bit on what we've been working in the past years. And in this case, maybe goes all the way back until 2016, which was when I really commenced a more close collaboration with the North American office after the success of Waterfront Puerto Vallarta. And I would like to just give you a little bit of a let's call it like this, sneak peek. This is a very American term that they do for movies to really show you what we've been working and before we commence the projects. But just so you understand, an office in North America, about 10 to 15 people, expands and contracts, is very dynamic. We've been able since 2017 work in this portfolio of projects, which I'm really proud to share today. Drexel Square, here you can see, for example, the backdrop of the station in Philadelphia. It is very important that we understand that this is a project that is a public-private partnership with Drexel University and Brandywine Real Trust. That was Jerry, basically the CEO of Brandywine. And you could see, for instance, the legacy of this project, which basically between 2015 and 16 was designed, and it was just open in 2019 before COVID hits. And I would like to say it's been a very important space during the COVID times because people need a lot of outdoor spaces to recreate and to share and to get out of the houses and be in a little bit of urban oasis. The Nasher at Duke University, another important cultural institution in which we worked in 2019. As you can see, this is actually a museum by Vignoli architects, and we have the pleasure to come back and understand how to address the landscape design surrounding to the building. And we're not talking about this today, but I just wanted to show you a little bit of the scale in which we work. So in this case, the intervention, although it might seem small, with the square at the entry, it's really about how we harmonize the building, who was one inscribed in a landscape and now acknowledge the landscape and address it, really delivering what we call a beautiful framing of the building per se, which was missing. So the importance of the practice of landscape architecture together with architecture, reason why today I have Jessica here with me, because it's all about collaboration. And it's about listening and hearing to each other. Access Crossing, which is an also important pocket park, which is very New York. New York is a city composed with a great streetscape and specifically very democratic in the sense about public spaces. And here a small pocket park in Essex Crossing, which is basically redeveloping all the way through the Delancey, a series of buildings which will activate and change the face of this area, but a new economic development, which is more of a mixed use for different type of uses. And here you can see the scale, which is really small, very New York, but it really creates, again, a specific moment for people to encounter the same with ecology and playground. One Manhattan Square, which actually was just open just right before the pandemic as well. This is more of a rooftop, it's really a courtyard, but it happens to be the biggest roofscape of Manhattan, which is not a minor detail. So we had to design everything on structures and wrapping around a podium, around a tower with Drexel Square and AAI. And you can see in the backdrop the relationship with the skyline of Manhattan and specifically the Manhattan Bridge. A project which is a private project, but it was very important for us to understand the different multicultural backgrounds that was living in that tower to design their spaces. As well as we work live, this is just a maquette, a photo from San Pellegrino. We're busy as landscape architects, collaborating with Atelier Verticale and the lead, in this case, big architects who are basically the vision and the master plan led by Bearker Ingalls, Thomas, Yelena, and it's been a great collaboration here because it's about transforming the face of San Pellegrino and addressing the environment. Therefore, you see in the front the green and in the back the building, that then depending where you look at the building, you will understand how it's framing the space. So this was the competition, Sumito. Right now we're busy in construction, and you can see the power of mixing these two, of architecture, framing the green, the fenestration of the arches, which is pretty much the narrative which we borrow and echo from the Italian legacy of San Pellegrino Terme next to the Brembo River. So how do we bring back a green? Normally in the past, this industries that were very much gray and not friendly to the environment. In this case, the source is water, so it is very much due in time. We're also working in other scales, so as we have projects in executions, Art Park is a master plan. We've been working together with the institution Art Park per se, where we've been dealing with research and programming. This is actually the team. Here you can see the board and Sonia, who is really leading and spearheading a beautiful transformation of Art Park and its legacy. And we were involved in the ideas and how to develop a master plan, which yet has to be released. And on the left, you can see our colleagues from Soil, which we team up, and at the same time Charcoal Blue, that has to do everything with theater, because it has to do at the end of the day with performance. But here you can see the plan, where it's basically a vision about commencing from the legacy that is already there and acknowledging, you know, the First Nation and Native America, but at the same time try to stitch it back to Lewiston and make sure that it becomes part of a major trail throughout the Niagara Falls. And it was a very important experience, because although the project has not been yet executed, in the phasing of master plan really becomes for us what we call a tool for implementation, a tool to understand how to make the work happening, how to prioritize, where the funding should be allocated, what creates more exciting, what brings longevity into the plan, etc. West8 is also known on a larger scale to understand, specifically speaking, the different scales. And in this one, we've been working specifically on developing in California this family, which we call the woodpecker, a beautiful reclaimed wood, working with nature, and the Olivia pole, in this case, produced by Silux, designed by West8. And in collaboration with Sarah Architects, we've been trying to understand how can we achieve this for in Sunnyvale campuses for Google. So it's been developing a family of furnishings that creates from day one, no matter the context where they sit, something that what we call placemaking. So in this case, this was a catalog that we work as a kind of project development to understand typology of seating, the ecology of seating. How can you create environments where people can sit and enable collaboration? Normally in a linear bench, you don't see the person next to you, but if you sit here, there needs to be some eye contact. There will evoke people to come and sit together and gather. And here you can see some of the mock-ups, although this is a project that we call development project. It is not yet achieved, but it's the way how we work, which is really important, understanding ergonomics, understanding proportion, comfort, and even production and manufacturing. That brings you to the tail end of works that we've been doing thus far, which is really important. This is a project we've been working together with Land Lease, specifically Scilab, who's been leading this from the urban side, together with Hassel Studio and Sarah Architects, but has to do with North Bay Shore and the Shorebird Plan Open Space, which is something where we just work advising in creating the conceptualization to draw some guidelines in which they can apply. So it's been very important for us to understand how nature weaves into future developments where residential has to be brought because of the pressure that residential has in the Silicon Valley area. So I think it's a very responsible way to approach the urban environment, not just with green and residential, but creating a mixed use so people can meet, and the confluence of people is really critical these days. Therefore, we can exchange. And this is one of the projects which I will dedicate at the end of this presentation, which I would like to really dig in. It's Miami Beach Convention Center next to this beautiful park called Pride Park, which works as a welcome mat of a former parking lot and now has a green arrival right in front of the City Hall of Miami Beach. Really a transformational project. And this was actually during COVID period, the day of a pre-opening, but then the park was closed because actually this park was serving for vaccination campaign. So all the people was coming to the park to get vaccinated because they really needed to get big masses of people, and that was the use. Of course, we are today in the COVID reality, and everything it's 6 feet or 1.5 meters apart. We had to go through this, but life was going on, and with the measures and using masks. You know, one of our key projects, which we've been working since 2013, open up in 2020, and it's very important to illustrate. So I take the opportunities in these calls because now everything is remote, and perhaps you are not aware, but this is a major milestone project, women-led project. This is at the moment of the opening. You can see the mayor and the donors all wearing masks at the moment of arrival. And although I'm not going to really focus on the project, I think as a landscape architecture office in Europe and North America, you know, having the opportunity to design a botanic garden, it's really, you know, an apex of the practice. As you can see here, it's a space that we actually design from the transformation of a former golf course and create a microcosm where this global garden offers to the community of Houston a little bit of a hint of their background or their heritage, because Houston is one of the cities in America that has the most diverse multicultural background. So for us, it was a commitment that the global garden has to show a hint of the different biotopes, ecosystems throughout the nation, and people can find meaning. And in a way, when you do gardens, it's always about what connects you to. So throughout a long and extensive research process, we had to understand the different environments together with Clark Condon, our collaborators, and the donors to really get into the weeds of what type of gardens we wanted to create. And here is just a little bit of a portfolio of that global garden I just walked you through. Is truly a mosaic, is truly what we call in Spanish a mestizaje, where everything comes together and weaves in, and you can see a diversity palette that is actually framed, which is very classic from the tradition of landscape, how to frame the green. And this is, of course, our team, specifically speaking, the team of Houston involved at the day of pre-opening, with Claudia, who is the president, in the middle, and Donna on the left. So here you can see the full team, and this is more of our core design team that were present the day of the opening, with a beautiful background of the landscape of the garden in the back. So that's just to show you, we've been more or less about 20 minutes in. We still have a few to share. I hope that we don't bore you. And this was just to literally show you how we work, the different scales of projects that we do. And this is a little bit of a hint of our office. We have a quite open environment. Actually, that physical model you see in the middle was pre-testing for Silicon Valley North Space Shore, how we can bring green corridors into the space. You can see the teams, they can all turn around and talk to each other, because for us, different that when you write poetry, when you're doing designs, you really need to be aware on the circumstances that are developing through the minutes, and how we have to connect. In this case, this is my colleague Sophia, who actually connects on a pretty often basis with Jessica, and connects with the other side of the world, in this case with Rotterdam. And there needs to be a constant communication channel. We cannot be in the office isolated. We need to be aware, and we need to be sensitive of what's occurring and learning the challenges that the projects bring. So it's very important to understand that West8, who has two offices as a main driver studios within North America and the Netherlands, we are in constant collaboration, and this word liaison doesn't come for granted. Here, obviously, in the Rotterdam office, it's an office that has, over 30 years, where the American office has about 15 years, so it's double the time. This is the settlement. This is really where we have a space where we have the support that is needed with over 80 people staff. Therefore, the things that we're missing with the 15 people, the 80 people complement to have a whole encyclopedia of expertise. Collaboration for us starts with sketching. It's really the most quick mechanism to share ideas, obviously always starting by a deep, thorough analysis of the site. But here actually you can see the team in the middle of a collaboration process. This is me throughout the COVID period here, actually in our Netherlands office, because we were able, due to the spacious quality, to collaborate and bring a few of our American colleagues into the office to be able to have a hybrid model. Because of the demanding targets of clients, we really had to respond. But what we really want to show for those of you who are students and watching, it's really about scale. So you can see here the plan. When you work in the landscape and urban design, which is different than architecture. Architecture is a foundation, but here it's different because we're really working on the scale. That black solid line that you can see are buildings. So we understand everything that occurs in that universe between the black line and the outer world, and how we organize and help architects to understand the relationship of buildings and the public space. It's really important. It's really important because it starts here, and you need to understand it at scale. And this scale also tells you that each line has a meaning. One line can mean a pathways for bike lanes, another one means property, another one means a setback, another one means the curb, the tree canopy, and all of those layers. And here you can see from, actually this is in our Rotterdam office, that we need the space for the scale. And therefore really important for us that we are always on a collaboration one-to-one, because at the end of the day, if you don't get an understanding how big these plans are, here actually me trying to hang up some of these drawings so you understand the size in which we work. And this is what makes the difference in our practice. And specifically speaking on this project, San Jose, was really the scale. This is an A0, and you can see that the master plan is composed by a series of A0s. And normally in the world today of computers and the digital world, we are so familiar to work in slideshows and everything digital. But at the end of the day, the tangible aspects of a print medium at the scale, it's really important to engage in a didactic way and understand, oh, this is what we mean. So when it comes out of the computer, it's really important for us to disclose. So here is a very critical project in which actually Jessica's been working on. We've been collaborating as well with the team of Scilab and many fields of extensive architects, including Heatherwick Studio, Grimshaw, for instance. But here we were working for almost 2 years on a series of guidelines for our client to understand what is the best way to accommodate open spaces in a very demanding, but at the same time, mixed use development that we are trying to achieve. And it all happens thanks to the initiative of Mayor Sam Liccardo, who you can see in this photo, because of our experience of designing high-speed train stations. San Jose will also be a future mobility transit hub, in which in this case, we're going back to Rotterdam, where we design a very successful train station that is very much in dialogue and relationship with the city. And in the case of San Jose, I think the mayor and the team that came with the delegation to visit, they were really impressed about this relation. They visit all of the stations, but the Rotterdam Central Station had really a statement, but on how it represents the city, how it's really looking at the city legacy, but at the same time bringing back that dignity that since the station it's on board, it's really truly bringing the emotion about the heritage of this city. You have to understand that in this case, this building really created a real estate boom, that since the station is here, there is a pride about the city that wasn't there. And I would like to say that since 2015 until 2021, Rotterdam has transformed itself in the terms of pride, dignity, public spaces, and it started actually with a building, which is the station, among other layers, of course, throughout the city. You can see at the station that brings light and effect of what we call a Rembrandt light effect that really brings the shine into the very dark station that used to be before, high ceilings, a very beautiful red welcome mat, tapestry on the paving, open space of the hall that you feel comfort and warmth. Normally stations and airports are always steel and aluminum and glass, which makes buildings very cold. And in this case, for us, delivering this warmth, you can see the contrast of the buildings and the interior of the warmth of the station with the red pavement, with the warm wood, and the attenuation of the light is really critical to get a harmony that people feels welcome every time they arrive to the station. And this brought really a change and a circumstance in the city that was heavily bombed. And our role was not just to work together with Bento and Krau, who were part of the architecture team, together with team CS, which really is the acronym for the joint venture we use. But one of our role was not just to bring that warmth in the materiality palette and the resiliency of the materials, but it was also to stitching it into the city. Here you can see the green veins of what the city is being cut in the middle by the train station, and the back, the more romantic 18th century singles making the turn. So how that comes to kiss the stations and create an arrival in a more residential scale, while the other face of the station where the hall is, it's really addressing to the metropolitan scale and having the green corridor of the former alleyway that creates that arrival into the city. And I think this is very important because at the end of the day, this is what we do. And as you saw in those drawings on North Bay Shore, creating these green corridors, this is what we plan for the city, to make city more resilient. And as what we call today, natural resilience of the cities are very important for ecology, for performance, and most importantly, how people live more healthy and longer. As you can see, that green corridor, actually, if you can see over here, this is a station, but that green corridor is already perceived in the tissue of the city of Rotterdam that comes out to the park and the green veins to the city. So the importance of the greens in the city is something that needs to be taken into account into the planning aspect of urbanization. It doesn't happen for granted, specifically in the urbanized continent that we are today. But not to forget that Rotterdam was a city that was very resilient, not just for water, but in this case for fire, because almost the city center was absolutely burned and not leaving any iconic building in the middle. So as I said before, the city of Rotterdam, due to the World War II, it was bombed, and this very much still exists in the mindset of the people. And therefore, it was an opportunity to come back with actually a new city, but at the same time dealing with the pain and the nostalgia. And it took many years. And I would say not only, 10 years ago, really the city hasn't changed in the positive matter that we are today. So in this case, good architecture, good open spaces really allowed those cities to emerge and to really create what we call a renaissance per se. You can see here in white, so you can understand the impact of everything that was bombed, as you can see. And that really has a humongous effect in the relationship of this city, very different than Amsterdam, which it didn't occur. So much of this massive here is part of that former white, footprint in which these new buildings took place. And I think it's very important not to forget, in this case, the aspect of the heritage of how we approach our landscape architecture in relationship with the identity and the DNA we have. But this is a drawing of the Port of Rotterdam to explain you a little bit. In this case, here is the city center and the former Portland that, little bit by little has been expanding all the way out. But what I'm trying to communicate here is the fact that there are two layers. One is the potential of and the challenge of creating new land, because we're basically running out of space to continue to have our economy for Portland. In communications also, with understanding the great ports of the world, that the world today is an offshore port that is the only way in which the economy can survive. And you can see the evolution through the river. This is also part of the legacy of the Dutch culture of making or reclaiming land, in this case in offshore, which is part of land reclamation. So here is a layer of the heritage in which we start to approach landscape architecture, because by creating new land, this pumping here, dredging that you can see, which is just particles with sand, which creates a soft approach, is the initiation of making new territory. But in the past, not so far ago, in the 1500s, was already done in a similar way. This is basically a former lake or a swamp in which, by the creations of dikes and canalizing the water, storing the water, we could create a series of parcels which could then be sold for agriculture. So what a great business model to create land out of water, and in which pretty much is part of the legacy of the Netherlands. So in that legacy, in that chromosome, is where resides our understanding of the practice of landscape architecture. And it has to do that when you create a new territory, so how do you shape it? How do you call a specific narrative in it? Because it is not made by God that gave us that territory, it is made by engineers and landscape architects. So it's very important to understand the identity of that future space in which we are creating. So here is just a series of core values in which we use as part of the heritage of landscape architecture in the Netherlands in general. Every time you create a new land, you create a space for security. Why? Because that space needs to be protected from future flooding, for sea level rise, and all the layers that has to do with managing water. So the first core value is security. You have to save the land. The second one, as soon as you create new land, you have a space for a new economy that could occur in that space. In this case, today, in the world today, is sport. In the past, is agriculture. And that creates at the same time a new ecology which it inhabit in those spaces. Combination that happens one-to-one with the potential that that economy creates an aspect of recreation as well. Therefore, you create a new Netherlands. This is all in Dutch, but the new Netherlands means the new lowland, or in Italian, Paesi Bassi, where this new land will be established. Here is a map of the Netherlands, so you understand a little bit of, specifically speaking, how the country is very much in a delta river, but at the same time, the fact that what you see in black are the different scales of the cities. Here's Amsterdam, Utrecht, and Den Haag, Rotterdam. And what is really important about this map is that this is the rest of the city. Every black footprint is the footprint of the city, is that how careful in a country like the Netherlands has to be with the urban sprawl that should not eat away the landscape. And or how important it is that where those dense areas of very dense areas of city, we understand and actually create the heritage or the dignity that is needed for new public spaces, for squares. This was an installation made back in the Biennale when we had to understand and make a statement about the heritage and the balance between the Dutch landscape and the Dutch city. Both have to be in a fine-tuned balance that creates an equilibrium that I believe until today is being maintained, but that doesn't guarantee our future. So therefore, in the practice, since West8 is being conceived, it's always about how do we preserve the landscape outside the city. Therefore, we don't enable that extensive urban sprawl, but how do we also work with reurbanizing and giving birth to the new environment. So therefore, it's very critical that we work together in this understanding of the balance of these two. To conclude, I would like to show you Governor's Island because it's a project that has to do with, specifically speaking, harbor, a new territory, the extension of making a new land. Here you can see the tip of Manhattan, Brooklyn before it was urbanized, and you can see, which is actually part of the challenge of flooding today, the most of the coastline has been urbanized and taking away the natural sponge condition of its wetlands. You can see here Governor's Island and the scale of a knot, specifically speaking. It used to be called as well Knot Island, Governors, because it used to be where the colonization took place and governors to protect. It has been always an army until, base until 2001. But here you can see the old shape and the expansive shape, which was where we intervened, specifically speaking. And this was made out of the Lexington Tunnel excavation. So all the debris and soil created extension of the island to create this flat landscape. Obviously, nothing much, all done by the engineering and military purpose. But you could see that there was no derelict, there is no actually any attributes. It's just flat landfill where they took advantage. And here you can see an old photos from early 20th century. And here you can see the historic area which remains untouched. So our intervention became out of the outcome of an international design competition where we only intervened outside the historic area, which we didn't touch at all, which is this whole zone over here, as you saw, the knot shape. And we had to come with a concept to transform the land zone area that has been gained from water because it was very much derelict, and it was, as I said before, an army base, and then it was for the Coast Guard for many years. So nobody in the city of New York and their residents have ever visited Governor's Island other than government and authorities. So from the beginning, we thought that the only way we could achieve this was to actually compete with the skyline of Manhattan, or to complement and create a destination where people can come for the first time in their life, experience the park, and see the harbor of New York City and have an experience of 360 degrees throughout. So here you can see at the top of those sketch hills, which was an early concept, and you can see how you can see the backdrop of Manhattan just above the height of the canopy of the trees. This is at the moment of the opening with Mayor Bloomberg, Leslie Koch, the National Park Service. You can see Adrian at the core end of the ribbon cutting. And here you can see the intervention after 2015 with all the way of the hills, phase 1 and phase 2, and enabling these zones, which is the next aspect I will speak in a moment, which is the development zone for future institutional and research buildings that will take place. This park is really a park that really addressed resiliency, but at the same time, you could see that the shapes and the undulation of the landscape was truly the way of transforming. So transforming the park through undulation, opposite of the flat pancake that you saw before, but by creating undulation with the topography, you will create a more engaging experience at the eye level, but at the same time guarantee that the investment of taxpayer money could be safeguarded. So everything that you see in red is a diagram that inside the red line, it will be safe in cases of flooding, which very much resembles the knot island shape. But in case of a flooding or a sea level rise, all of this will be washed away. So this was even before Sandy and the latest threat that Manhattan recently had. But by lifting the park up, we understood, because of the exposures and understanding floodings and contour, that that will be the only way in this park can survive. And then enabling, in this case, the future development zones, because we didn't have the budget, believing that for the future development, in this case, the future buildings will address at that moment when they commence that condition, and they will need to meet. So it's a very smart approach. They will need to meet the level for sea level rise proofs, and culminating at the end with the hills, which really creates that 360-degree view of the harbor. Obviously, this came also as well with a sustainable approach of demolishing after a very careful surveillance and almost inventory to the inch of which buildings contribute and not contribute in the quality. So it was a very progressive approach, I would like to say. And then basically treating the materials and keeping the debris below these hills as one of the approach, and then covering them with topsoil to create what we call this undulation. These are computer models in which we were testing different ways of how to make the sculpting of the land. It's almost like clay sculpting to frame the views, but at the same time working with the soil, working with nature, and allowing a green soft solution rather than a wall to actually protect ourselves for flooding. And when you work in natural conditions with resilient materials. It's also about recycling. And in this case, when we were doing, again, the seawall edge here in the middle of construction, we took all the stone that was there in the past. In the meanwhile, we were defining the edges for safety, future wave impact, and realized that material. This is the former granite that used to be in that wall, to create this beautiful aspect, which was truly an spontaneous process of recycling, saving CO2, not having the need to ship this away. We say, no, keep them here. This is precious material. And with this granite, we created the scramble, which is basically a way to intersect the zigzag pathways for children. So you can see how popular they are to come all the way up or create playgrounds in the slide hills, the highest slides of Manhattan, and so forth. And here you can see a view how the hills and the undulation landscapes, similar to the plan, talks back to the city, and it's about how you get lost and create memories into the park. This is almost at the end of this part, but here you can see and recognize as well, when you have a young park, you have young trees. Therefore, we came with the approach of creating, in this case, a nursery, a forest, a plantation approach, where we planted zillions of trees, very young, but very dense. Therefore, you get a first green effect. And therefore, natural selection will take place where trees are start to grow. This picture is about from 5 years old. Today is way much bigger. And within that growth, as you can see here, we nested a hammock grove, which was coming out of the process of a exchange with the community about what were their desires. And one of them, in a postcard we received, was actually to create hammocks in the park. And therefore, we thought it was a great opportunity to have these hammocks within the grove. Here you can see the young trees, but in the future, this will be nested in a forest. So hand in hand, in parks, it always comes with the layer of ecology and green, native planting, of course, that actually creates a better and a more resilient ecology for the space. And it culminates at Liggett Terrace, where we had to address and welcome arrivals. So as soon as you come out of the tunnel of this building, from the historic site into the new site where the future park exists, was this moment of arrival and surprise, almost where every Sunday people come and sit down and actually linger through the gardens, in the playgrounds, before they go into the undulating landscape and the hills. But it all comes together with the experience of the bicycle. So even before there was a design, the client have decided, first of all, that this is a park for the 5 boroughs of New York City. This is a park that the New Yorkers never had the opportunity to experience. So the statement was, one, everybody is welcome. And here was a moment like in New York, as you know, is very famous that everybody comes together in the subway, all the different backgrounds. And in the same to Governor's Island, everybody comes together in the ferry. Everybody is shoulder to shoulder, different incomes, different cultural levels. They all come with their bikes. And for the first 5 years was really about ownership and giving them the ownership where you don't need a permit, and the experience of biking in an island, knowing that you will not be struggling with traffic and that you own the space, was really the initiation. So with this, I would like to stop, and I would like to actually ask, in this case, the crowd to ask questions. And it will be very important for us to enable a dialogue together with my colleague Jessica to really answer your questions about collaboration, about what you saw, and understanding anything that you would like to ask us. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And despite the challenges, I will put back into my screen, despite the challenges of remote, of course, we prefer to do this in person. We try to make it the most seamless as possible to you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It was, of course, very, very interesting. And with the last project, it's I think it's incredible how you react to a problem like a flood, creating a new landscape, human landscape, and so on. So I just ask to students to write in chat question or raise the hand in Zoom. And waiting for his, I just have a question. It seems from your project that you show a sort of a technology-free area in urban context. I mean, now we are used to think about city with the technological answer, with artificial intelligence, all the kind of things that make the city more competitive and so on. And when I see your picture, everything come back to the nature. So it seems a sort of tech-free area. I don't know if it is what you're looking for. Of course, technology helps us to design and so on. But this is a strong responsibility, no? Sometimes they said that the architecture become really architecture when he end his life and it's become a part of the nature. And it seems that this is your kind of approach, especially in the last project that I see. I say this because I told you I'm a little bit old one, and I know for example, your first projects and Schönbrunn in Rotterdam that was based on technology aspects. So I ask if there is a relation between this, or you come back totally to nature, you want to work with nature, maybe from your Dutch experience, no? That is all the game, artificial and nature work together. So this is my question.
Sure, no, I think it's an excellent question, Carlo. I think indeed, referring back to Schönbrunn, indeed it was a manifest on technologies with the crane, but we like to say that that was an homage to the city that was missing an identity due to the aspect that it was erased from the bombs attack and the fire. So the city at that time was claiming an identity, and I think it manifested in the cranes lamps as an option to visualize that. But I would like to say that in our practice, our approach, it's really systemic and rational and pragmatic. And when we say systemic, it's because we have in public space design, you have to layer in, the water, topography, utilities, public space, private space, green space, hardscape, softscape, water. So you have to work with layers, and that creates a very systemic layering that is the only thing that will create the result. And the technology of today, so in that sense is very, let's say systemic, but on the other end, the technology where it's supporting us the most is more on the first aspect of it, and then the first one with analysis. So in this case today, analysis is very much driven by computer data. GIS, for example, provides everything you need, historic understanding, layering. But then there is the part that is intangible, which is the cultural landscape. This is very hard for architects to understand. And that has to do with legacy, that has to do with the people and sociology. And this is where you really need to take them into account, specifically the world of today. And that is the soft part. And then it comes back again into the technology when it has to do with this world, which is where Jessica is an expert, visualization, computers, digitalizing the design, understanding is the scale is right. So, and perhaps it's not manifested as an outcome, it's manifested with green, but everything has been in some fashion rationalized and digitalized to be able to be processing to the built environment. And even more, and I would like to say here, with the world of Revit and BIM, as you all know, BIM is doing an immense change in the industry of building, but has not arrived yet in the industry of landscape. It is not even close. And they're missing way a lot. And maybe that's also why we're not going to resolve this today, but it's way behind. It's way behind. I hope this more or less enable a debate. But happy to take any other questions. Please feel free.
Yes, there is a question by Anya Wiatkowska. Maybe you can do it by Anya, if you can put on your microphone.
Yeah, hi. I have two questions for you. And the first one, are there any differences in landscape architecture tasks or approaches in North America and Europe?
I think they are, no, Jessica? So I will tell you mine, and then Jessica, you can tell yours. But I mean, Jessica works with both sides I work purely in the North American market. That's what I work, and it's interesting because maybe I would say the main difference in North America is there is an intensity or an attendance towards working really close with the client, where the client is really involved and engaged. Therefore, the amount of time that you have to spend walking and educating the client why you make some of those choices, why the design is designing this way. In Europe, it's not even conceived that way. Like in Europe, it's conceived, you are the professional, you know what you're doing, come back to me with the design. So it's less process oriented, specifically even more with, let's call it like this, private developers versus, you know, when you work with the government. With the government, they're even more, okay, you know what to do, just deliver, you know, the end of the process. So, but maybe then, and maybe you can examine this. What else do you see, Jessica, in the aspect of the difference between the two sides?
In America, for sure, I've been experiencing like this sort of like, yeah, it's a really long process and it's becoming more and more multidisciplinary. So you always have around the table like different expertise, such as the biologist, the traffic engineer, then there is the client with own desire, then of course there is the city with the peoples, and everyone has a voice. And our role as landscape architects or architects is really becoming like taking all of this voice and give them like a sort of a result. So bringing to life the desire of everyone. And what Daniel said, yes, in Europe is more like, this is our job, we know how to do it. And like, there is not this mixture happening yet. I think this is a bit missing. So on a positive side for America, even though it's really time consuming, it's a lot of communication, gets you really stressed throughout the process, but it brings like all the parties together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and another one would be, what was the most challenging project in your practice?
I think all of the projects are challenging in their own way, so you cannot say one or the other. Most of the time, most of the challenge in my personal experience has to do with time, because you know you have to resolve the impossible in a very narrow time, and this you cannot predict. You know, the clients, there is an urgency, and this is for me one of the most challenging. And the second part, which is always very, very difficult, is how do you give back? So I think landscape architects, they always see the landscape, okay, we're giving back this amount of green space, and you have to tell the client and the development team, and they're just, no, that's not enough. You know, so you always have to stand strong and say, no, that's not enough, you need to perform more. And but that will take me more real estate, yes. So here becomes a real debate, and we have to deliver the bad news. But at the same time, it's our responsibility. But then if they don't follow because they know, they will hit what we call a glass ceiling when they go out to the communities, and the community will tell, you are taking away what? No. So how do you at least keep it as it is, or provide more benefit in terms of green and ecology? Thank you, Anna. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mariana Pereira, do you want to make your question?
Yes, so thank you. Thank you for the lecture. My question is about thinking about changes brought by climate change. What are our views on that aspect? Maybe, I don't know, if you see cultural changes, for example, I was thinking in Italy, there's now more struggle with stormwater, and while in the Netherlands there's this culture of living with water, but now we have heat stress. It's become an issue, and also maybe also in the USA, how you see these debates about climate change and the role of professionals on that.
It's a very important question, and I think this is a question in which we cannot compare why in the Netherlands. It's good that you ask, but you cannot compare because there are different approaches. And just to put you an example, the Japanese, they know that they have tsunamis and earthquake, and the way how they approach it, although technology is getting there, is the core of their essence is that they have an education system that they know that when this happens, they know what is the evacuation strategy. They know where the teacher has to gather with the students. So there is some sort of licensing of common on how to approach. So it's very cultural. So climate change also has to do with each one of our cultures, how to address it. And in the case of the Netherlands, we cannot undermine the fact that they've been dealing with this since the conception of the country. So this is something that climate change, they created the climate for their environment and they change it. So they understand that, and therefore it's more controlled, but at the same time, it's incredibly committed that they can never stop pumping water. So the day that power runs off, who knows what will happen, you understand? So there are some challenges that are unspoken, but I think the solutions has to be, we think, learning from each other. So we need to learn from the different approaches, and then you have to see what to implement in your local and specific context. That's the most important. So how to apply it. And in the case of Italy, I think Italy has also great history, which in this case, borrowed by, the legacy of the Romans on engineering, and that's still present. But I think sometimes through, let's call it evolution of our society, we tend to forget or we tend to leave behind. So it's very important to embrace certain traditions. About what I'm trying to say with the Romans is about the ambitious way that they were thinking. So sometimes we have to go back and think a little bit on the ambition of their engineering was truly remarkable and was spread throughout Europe. We're not thinking about the way of colonizing, but we're thinking about how they made the environment work in a more sustainable way. That there is a lot there that needs to be investigated, because at the end of the day, what they did, they expand lifespan, they expand health, life. All of a sudden, people was living longer, and there was some sort of well-being that they created, and they created peace, and therefore that enables a balance in time. So it's a lot to speculate, but I think in mediums like this, like today, it's a good way to have a conversation, because at the end, academia is for this, to enable a dialogue. And I'm not saying this is the only way.
Very good. Thank you.
Quan Chen, can you make your question, because I don't understand exactly reading it.
Okay, maybe the question is a little bit too broad. I saw you have so many projects, and obviously they can be considered as government project, and I believe in the North American system should be approved by the municipal government. So I just want to say, in a broader view, which government for you is easier to deal with or to achieve your design?
It's a tricky question, because governments are always the authority in which they need to make sure that responsibly what you're proposing follows the rule of law, code, and all of those layers. So I would like to say there is no favoritism. You have to perform professionally, and you have to address very serious, almost like a doctor, your patient, and understand the diagnosis of the side conditions. However, point, it's very important that with the governments you work, that in my experience, some leaders have a bit more of a voice. And sometimes those leaders are the ones who really make the project happen. So it's not us, it's the leader that managed to steer the team to achieve the product. And that is what I admire from great clients such as Leslie Koch, who in this case, her policy is like, everybody's welcome. The design is not important, people is important. And enable them to take the space where in Governor's Island, you were free to do anything, you don't need a permit. That was the statement. While in nothing to regret, but it's a heritage landscape, Central Park, you need a permit to do a birthday. So here, I think at the end, what is very important is the spirit of the leader of that government you're working with. It's essential.
Yeah, if I can add something, I've been experiencing also that, yes, we are professional, yes, there are law, there is a government, but as a professional, I think we always need to listen to the voices. And sometimes this law, because it's a form of evolution, can be challenged, or at least as a professional, we try to do that when we think there is an opportunity to do that.
Perfect. Okay, we'll go fast because we have a lot of questions and we have 5 minutes more, I hope. Danielle, if it's okay for you.
No, I love it. I think this is the kind of dialogue we really like. So I'm very glad there are very engaging and very good questions, Carlo. We're happy to stay online until you think it's necessary.
Okay, thank you very much. So Carola Moss, can you make your answer, your question?
Hi. Yeah, I think you already answered a part of it, but I wondered how you work with resistance from the public. Here in Switzerland, many projects don't stand a chance because the public votes against it. And I wondered if there are similar experiences in the Netherlands or the USA.
No, I think it's a very good question. No?
Yeah, I personally didn't experience that, but because as we said before, especially in America, it's like a back and forward between us and the city and our professionists. So in the end, you come out with a result that in the most cases are accepted because you've been listening first.
Yes. And Carola, I think it's very important that I think it's also generational. The world is changing. So that modernistic approach of here is a desire to design Brasilia and it's inspired on the wings of those days are over. I think maybe I'm wrong, maybe they come back in 300 years in Mars. I don't know. But it is very important that it is coming as is giving birth from the voices, is giving birth from the site condition. And in this case, landscape architecture, I feel has the privilege that you have to give birth to a project that is conceived within the genius of a place. In landscape architecture, you cannot design, a coconut palm in the North Pole. It will not fly. So you really need to understand the genius of the place. And that already is the first step to acknowledge, the cultural landscape, the legacy, the history, what the site is informing. It's less of an object. It's more of you're developing a soul, a spirit. And I think it's very important that when you do landscape architecture, like Jessica mentioned, you really have to start with your very deep, thorough analysis on the site, which will give you lots of answers, and working with the community. And do we receive sometimes pushback? Yes, we do. And sometimes we have to go back and redesign and listen what they said and come back to them. Look, we address it like this. What do you think? And that, knowing that you're listening, that really opens up a long, winding road.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carlos Morales Davila from Lima, Peru.
Yes, hello everyone. I have a question regarding the indigenous practices and knowledge, because as I was saying in my message, Lima is probably considered one of the cities that will be affected or will suffer from water scarcity in the next decades. So my question is, in which way do you think would be the best way to integrate that ancestral knowledge into the contemporary practice to deal with those issues?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and it's very important to answer properly. I am not familiar with all of the Inca knowledge on engineering. I'm certain there are many strategies, but I think this resembles a bit with what I was saying before about what did we learn from the Persians or from the Romans or from the Napoleon era. So in terms of engineering, I'm speaking about the engineering because sometimes those society they were really learning from the more military civil / approach. So the civil came out of the military implementation, specifically speaking about engineering and so forth. But in this case, I think the most important part is to really protect the source. I think sometimes we think water is it's only, you know, the materia, but soil, it's also very important, because water and soil, it's a cycle of cleaning. But what I wanted to tie that is because if you don't protect the soil, probably you're polluting the water in which you will pick it up and recollect later. So I think one, it's about protecting the soil. So that's why I think, you know, in the 50s and in the early 20s, when national parks and protective territoires to protect soil from development came as a planning application tool, is tremendous. I think that is more in the branch of policy. So how do we create policies that protect certain territories to make sure that the source of water, where water is coming from, is protected? That's one layer. And I think the second layer, which has to do a little bit with your indigenous practice, is to really engage those culture, those community that pertains that knowledge. I don't know them, but that is what Jessica was saying, that when you have, you know, a client, but this is very American, which is a democratic system, but maybe in Peru, it's very important that every part of the society sits at the table during this process. So it's not, here's the architect and the response, but it's a collaborative process where everybody's at the table and you invite those indigenous heritage to participate, and you have to listen. How is it that they did? Thank you, Carlos.